Leaving the military doesn't mean leaving behind the weight of war. Maybe you're wrestling with how your service shaped you, or you're trying to make sense of the lessons that history keeps teaching us, but the leaders seem to ignore. What if you can see those patterns clearly, how past wars shaped our service, and how your service can shape what's next for you? Imagine feeling like you're not alone in that struggle, like your experience is part of a larger story that actually matters. Today we're talking with Lieutenant Colonel Patrick Naughton, a soldier, historian, and author of Born from War, about the generational impact of military service, leadership lessons from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam, and what history tells us about the way we treat our veterans. His unique perspective, both as an infantryman and later as a medical officer, offer insight on leadership, transition, and the scars that service leaves behind. But before we dig into this episode, make sure you are subscribed to the email newsletter at driveonpodcast.com/subscribe. You'll get my 5 favorite episodes sent straight to your inbox. No fluff, just the best insights to help you drive on. I also want to take a moment to raise awareness for something deeply important to our community, the Global War on Terrorism Memorial Foundation. This organization is working to build a permanent national memorial in Washington, D.C. to honor the service members, families, and civilians impacted by the global war on terrorism. This memorial serves as both a tribute to those who served and also a way to ensure that their sacrifices are recognized and remembered for generations to come. If you want to learn more about how you can support the mission, visit GWOTmemorialfoundation.org. That's GWOT memorialfoundation.org. Now let's get into today's episode. Patrick, welcome to the show. I'm really glad to have you here. Looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the invite. Definitely honored to be here, and I'm also looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into the military, kind of things that you did in the service, and then kind of lead up, what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah, so it's been a long run. Joined in 11, so I joined in 1996. Joined in the delayed entry program. So my dad signed me off at 17. Was 11 Bravo. Went to the 101st for about 3 years. Got out for a little bit. Then I was in the National Guard. The National Guard still was in 11 Bravo for more years. And then I moved to Las Vegas, went to ROTC, did about 3 years of that, got commissioned, came back in December 2004, and then came back in as a medical guy. So I was infantry when I was enlisted, actually switched over when I was a sergeant, so an NCO, and then became an officer as a medical guy. But since then, since I mentioned, I've had a whole bunch of different assignments that are kind of very unique for the Army. I've done the traditional units that everybody kind of goes through as a lieutenant and captain and so on. And when I became a captain, I did some different things. So I was able to do the resident command and general staff college here at Fort Leavenworth, where I'm back again now. While there, I was able to do the Art of War Scholars Program. And from there, I did an interagency fellowship with the Army. So I was serving in D.C. in one of the federal agencies as a member of their staff. After that, I did 2 years in Congress as an Army liaison. I was on the Senate side. And then after that, I became the G4 for the Surgeon General. And then now we're back in Fort Worth. Actually, I was an XO for a field hospital. Then became the G4 for the Surgeon General, and now I'm back here at Fort Leavenworth teaching at the Command and General Staff College. It's been a very, very long, interesting career.
Well, it is interesting, and one of the things that, as an infantryman, you can relate to this. We have this, I don't know what it is about us, but we look at everyone else as less than.
Yeah.
When we're infantry, right?
Right.
Except for Doc.
Right.
Doc
yeah.
is the guy
Doc.
who comes around and saves our ass when we do something stupid. So
yeah.
So you've got like the best of both worlds, it seems like.
Yeah, it's been interesting, and I will say, if for anybody thinking about joining, if you go with the infantry and you just do that for 3 years or whatever it is, that'll set you up for success for any job you want after. You'll always have that core soldier skills that you can fall back on that makes you really powerful if you want to switch over to officer or take on a different role, after that.
Yeah, I found in my career some of the the officers who have, and this is not to knock any of the other officers that I had that didn't go this route, but the officers that stood first and then became officers understood what
Right.
the other guys were doing. The guys who are under them now, who were under their command, and it just seemed like there was a greater understanding. So I always like hearing those stories of to officer, how
A
that
shift, and
yeah.
I've seen it both. I've seen very successful officers make that switch, and then I've seen some who have never been able to kind of get out of that mindset. So they're like, oh, I'm gonna be all my soldiers are gonna love me. I'm gonna be the best officer. They're filling sandbags, and I'm gonna be filling sandbags.
Right.
And that's great and that's noble, but if you're filling sandbags, then you're not leading your formation and you're not in the meetings where you need to be in, advocating for your soldiers and so on. So yeah, you got to kind of find that balance, if you will.
Yeah.
So I've seen that kind of be good and bad, turns out for some.
Yeah, so just a kind of interesting story. I was kind of thrown into sort of situation where I was a E5 sergeant was deployed, and just over a matter of different circumstances, our platoon didn't have an officer. Like our
Okay.
PL
Yeah.
was just not there, and next higher ranking, I became the PL for a little while, and I was so used to being there with the guys,
Right.
like you said, like filling the sandbags, working on the trucks and doing all the things that we needed to do to get ready for a mission, and things started getting a little out of hand and a little hectic and getting a little haywire. And one of the other sergeants in our platoon, he looked up, he goes, "Who the hell's in charge of this?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Oh shit, that was me.
That's me.
I guess I shouldn't be doing this stuff. You guys should be doing that.
Right,
I should
right,
be
yeah.
getting, prepared for this mission and, letting people know what's actually going on and doing other
Right.
leadership stuff that, I was just like thrown in the deep end. And
Yeah.
but they do say like when you are in the military, to know your job, all the jobs, but also several levels, above
Yep.
yours as well. And it's for that reason, because you might
Absolutely.
just get thrown into a situation
Yep.
like that. And,
Yeah, absolutely.
luckily that only left a few days. And I was like, thank God this is over. Take it back. I don't want it.
Yeah, right.
So, your book, Born from War. Tell us about that book, kind of came from, and what it's all about.
Yeah, so my father, he was a Vietnam veteran. 2 years. He did 1 year in Vietnam and then 1 year at Fort Benning. An infantry officer, the 82nd Airborne for half of it in Vietnam, and then his second half of his, he was an ARVN advisor to the South Vietnamese Army. So he kept all of his letters and his diary from his time in Vietnam. And so, growing up, that was always kind of, he never really talked about Vietnam growing up, but that was kind of one of the things that influenced me to then join the Army, that it was always in the background that my father was a combat veteran from Vietnam, and so it was always kind of there, And then when you're a kid, you always dig through your parents' stuff, and so I would find, medals and those little green notebooks with the awards in them and so on. You're not really knowing what that stuff is. So that was really the heavy influence that caused me to join. But so, I had really about 10 years ago, I started thinking about, man, I should do something with all of my dad's stuff. And that's really when I started getting into writing and writing articles and so on. And so I'd always wanted to write a book. So I thought, oh man, it'd be a really cool idea to take my dad's year in Vietnam and then write about how that influenced me to then join the Army, and then my year in Iraq, and kind of a back and forth of the similarities between the GWOT and then Vietnam. So that's basically what the book's about, and it talks about all that stuff. So it's really focused on that family part, but it all pulls back and talk about some of the strategic things that happen behind the scenes for both conflicts. And what I was really shocked when I did the research is how similar the same mistakes that we made in Vietnam were some of the same mistakes that we later made in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it was really interesting to research and find that out.
Yeah, just looking at the parallels between Vietnam and Afghanistan specifically, with the withdrawal, and just how it was almost like you could take some of the pictures from the wall, and it was almost like you can put them side by side. And if you didn't know anything about either of those countries, I don't know that you would have been able to tell the difference between the two conflicts, because it seemed like it was the same type of situation. And
Absolutely.
It kills me too, because it's like we did that already, and it wasn't though. Some of the people who were in command positions, they were around for that type of thing. I mean, younger obviously, but they went to school. They learned about things. They took
Yeah.
some history classes. I'd presume at some point.
Yeah.
These same mistakes, right? But
Yeah.
that's kind of
It's
what you're looking at
crazy.
is
Right.
looking at some of these generational impacts too,
Mhm.
right? And because not only was it from higher up command level
Mhm.
where there are people who knew what was going on in Vietnam, and then
Mhm.
they're in some sort of leadership position now, and
Mhm.
but there's also things that the veterans who were on the ground fighting in Korea in World War II and all
Mhm.
these other conflicts, but Vietnam specifically,
Mhm.
and they come home, they have some issues.
Mhm.
They're dealing with them as best as they can. Um, and we had our guys coming back from Afghanistan, Iraq, others,
Mhm.
Africa and other places,
Yeah.
and they're coming a lot of the similar issues. And
Mhm.
are we really dealing with them in the right way? Are we have we
Right.
learned those lessons, or is it very similar to this withdrawal that we're talking about?
Mhm.
How did your father's experience in Vietnam influence your perspective on all of these things?
Yeah, as I'm doing as I've done my research for the book and my other articles and so on, I'm always struck about how similar all the experiences are for veterans, whether it was the American Civil War, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, all the way up to now. And so it's really striking. Like you said, you could just remove the war, whatever clothing they were wearing, and it was almost kind of the same experience when they came back. And for Vietnam, obviously, that's really an ugly stain on our national psyche of what happened to the veterans when they came back for. I talk about that in the book. I've interviewed a lot of people that my dad served with and talked about their experience of when they came back through California and there were people at the gate and stuff spitting on them and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that. Um, so that what happened to the Vietnam veterans is huge. It's a huge national stain, and I think we're finally coming to terms with that. And it's now honoring those Vietnam veterans. They start doing more parades for them, honor flights, things like that. So some of that, I think we've realized the mistake the way that we treated those veterans when they came back.
Yeah.
And so I will say now with Iraq and Afghanistan, you don't see that. You did not see that. You did not see the public turn against the actual soldiers who were being sent overseas to fight. And so I think that's one of the biggest, I guess, positive lessons that came out of Vietnam is that we learned, okay, you can disagree with the policy, you can disagree, and then you can vote. That's why we have voting, so you can, make changes in that way if you want to, but you don't take it out on the soldiers who were sent over there to serve.
Right.
So I think that's one of the biggest, positive, I guess, good news stories you could say that came out of the war for veterans.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely been a shift in that
Hmm.
society's mindset of the warfighter and
Hmm.
the men and women who put on that uniform to
Hmm.
and do our country's work. And
Right.
I was at a event the other night, and it was an opening for a restaurant, the
Hmm.
restaurant.
Yeah.
And this isn't a promo for the restaurant or anything. It's just an attitude of the times that I experienced while I was there. It was just a whole room full of people, all their staff and everything were there, and just their appreciation for the military, for
Hmm.
first responders, for the men and women who put on a uniform of any sort.
Hmm.
It could be police, firefighter, EMS. It could be
Hmm.
military. It could be anyone.
Hmm.
Their respect for those people was just extraordinary, and it
Yeah.
was true respect. It wasn't this corporate, let's just hang a
Hmm.
banner and support our troops, and then we get
Hmm.
the nice PR moment. It was a legitimate. You could tell these people actually
Hmm.
cared, and I was thinking about just God, what a great time to be
Yeah.
a veteran is
Yeah.
in this time period where you don't have to worry about people
Hmm.
spitting on you, calling you names, and all these kind
Yeah.
of things. And so, that I mean, just that right there, as you're saying, is such
Hmm.
a difference in
Hmm.
that time period where you come back from war. I would imagine
Hmm.
maybe not being totally proud of some of the things that you had to do
Right.
because I mean some of that stuff. Let's see the writing on the helmet from I forget
Hmm.
whatever it's from. War is hell, and
Right.
and it is, and it is,
Hmm.
and then you come back and people are even thankful for it. It's like, well,
Yeah.
what did
Yeah.
I even do it for? So, right? So,
Yeah.
seeing people like your father and other people coming back from these.
Hmm.
From combat over there is got to be difficult to see that, but great to see like the shift in society attitude towards that, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I'm glad in that sense at least history hasn't repeated itself. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely a good news story. We were in D.C. stationed there, and I used to see the honor flights come in every time I was going TDY or whatever, all full of Vietnam veterans. I write about the book, and people in the airport would all stop and clap. From their busy travels, everybody would just stop and cheer them on as they were walking off the plane and so on. Definitely very refreshing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, on the flip side of that, what were some of the lessons that you think from Vietnam that we were talking about, like, might have been overlooked in Iraq and Afghanistan, the global war on terror in general?
Yeah. There's this book. It's called The War Managers, and it was a book written by a general officer who served in Vietnam, and he blind polled GO who served, from all the branches who served in Vietnam, and they were all able to, answer without retribution, without their names on it, and so on. And the lessons that were in there, I wish that book had been handed to a person who was headed over to Iraq and Afghanistan instead of some of the other stuff that they made us read, because there were so many lessons that could have been learned from that experience in Vietnam that we could have applied in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the two biggest ones, I think, are the, commitment is number one. And so if we're going to go to war, if our political leaders decide that we're going to go pursue a conflict, we cannot move past, for whatever reason, the political discussion, and we're going to move to conflict to further our aims, we have to be 100% in. We cannot do it with a volunteer force. We need to fully mobilize. We need to apply all our resources against it. We have to stop this obsession with, putting the least amount of resources towards it, trying to get the maximum amount of output. We have proven time and time again that does not work. So if we're going to commit, we've got to fully commit a force to it, and we've got to commit to it to the long haul. That's number one. And the second thing is, the importance of our advisory role. So, in all conflicts, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, we assessed the local forces. We said, they're not up to par yet to achieve our aim, so we need to insert American forces in order to buy time for us to train them, get them up to par to fight their own conflict. But as soon as you insert American forces on the ground, mission creep takes over, becomes the main effort, and it just takes on a life of its own, and then those local forces are pushed to the side. They're still being advised, but it's no longer that main effort, and we're not putting all our resources behind it. And then all of a sudden we end up being there for 10 years. We start looking around and saying, what are we doing here? All right, we've got to turn it back over to the local forces, and by then it's too late. We've already neglected them for so long, and then we try to bring them up to speed very quickly and hand it over to them, and as we saw with the South Vietnamese, did not go well. The Iraqi army, some success stories, it's not as bad now, but we're still supporting them, over the horizon type stuff, and then obviously Afghanistan. So I think that's the two biggest lessons, is that full commitment, number one, and number two is really assess and put our effort behind those local forces if that's who we're going to try to prop up to take over the conflict.
Yeah, those local forces, we had some interaction with the Afghan army, the Afghan border police, and we had a bunch of different interactions with the locals, and when they not up to par, I think they were playing a different game. Never mind not being up to par.
Right.
We would get them for training, and if they lasted an hour training with us, that would be a miracle.
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
Right.
At some point, this is my opinion, anyways. You may or may not agree with this opinion, and that's totally fine. But my opinion is that at some point you have to kind of realize that maybe their want for this is not as great as ours. They just maybe want to go and just continue living their lives as is. And if the Taliban's in charge, then the Taliban's in charge. If somebody else is in charge, then somebody else is in charge. But just leave me alone. Is maybe the attitude that they have. And so we wanted to go kick some ass because we just had a bunch of our fellow countrymen and women killed, and we wanted to go get some revenge, and we had that burning desire inside of us, but they didn't really care. Didn't seem that way, anyways.
And if that's the assessment, again, you shift back to that first point, is then, okay, if they're not going to achieve the goals that we want, then we've got to fully apply our commitment to it and not do it half-heartedly. We've got to fully apply, more than one or two divisions and get after what we're trying to get after. But again, it goes back to, the obsession that we have, going back to really to the end of World War II, is trying to do this limited amount of commitment and trying to achieve this maximum outcome through just air. You see that in the Balkans. We're just going to do things from the air, just do tomahawk diplomacy, and it just doesn't work. Time and again, And you look at so my dad, he advised the South Vietnamese. The common soldier, the South Vietnamese soldier, was a tiger on the battlefield. But once to that operational level, you got to those brigade and division commands. That's where it really all fell apart. And so, it's interesting. Yeah, the advisory piece. How do you assess it? How do you find ways to make them gain the same, gain this or want the same objectives that you do? Yeah, it's very, very complicated.
Well, and as you're talking, it gets me thinking about like a company. And I'm not talking military company. I mean, it could be that, but in a business, somebody who's really great at making whatever widget you're making
Right.
in a company, and they're the best widget maker that the world has ever seen, and the company's like, well, we need to promote this guy, and we need to get this guy to higher up, and then he becomes management level, and he's moving up in the company, and he starts falling apart, and
Right.
he's not able to perform. He's not able to do this because what he was good at was making those widgets.
Right.
He wasn't good at leading people, right?
Yeah.
And so, you were talking about the South Vietnamese, and they were tiger on the battle. They were absolutely incredible on the battlefield. But when you took them out of that situation to a leadership role, then that's where things kind of started falling apart. And so, sometimes I think we have to look at people for their leadership ability and not their ability to do whatever that job was that they were tasked for.
Right.
If that makes sense, right?
Yeah, no, you got to do that analysis, and that old the bus analogy. You've got to get the right people in the right seats, and,
Yeah.
and sometimes you get that wrong.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate because you want to be able to promote those people and get them higher pay and all those types of things, but at the end of the day, if that's what they're really good at,
Excuse me.
and if that's what they are, that's where they want to be, then that's where we should, I think, where we should probably keep them. And
Yeah, because some people are, they're not good operational and strategic leaders, and that's perfectly fine, right? You find that the talent where they fit well in, and then you just keep them in those roles,
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's, I don't think that's a bad thing, right? But
Oh yeah, not at all.
so we're learning lessons, right? We're starting to see some parallels between Vietnam, between Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm saying those. I mean the global war on terror in general.
Right, yeah.
Because I know there's other theaters. of
Other
operation,
theaters, yeah.
But between the global war on terrorism, between Vietnam, between all these different conflicts, we're seeing these parallels that are being drawn there, and so you're you're training the future military leaders, and we're talking about leadership and at whatever that role was, but are they cut out there? What leadership qualities do you look for in that type of person that you're trying to advance? You can be great at making that widget, but then you're moving up into a leadership role. How do we know that we have the right person for that leadership role?
Yeah, I mean, observation of how but kind of the way, good way to assess it is, going back to the comments earlier about the infantry. So when you're raised in the infantry, you have a certain mindset. If you're not infantry, you're not anything. You're looking at badges and tabs and so on, and if you don't have a Ranger tab or you don't have a CIB or whatever it is, then you're not value added to the nation, or you can't speak up at this meeting that we're in. That type of thing. So when you're looking at somebody trying to make a shift from that direct, tactical level of leadership, you're looking at people who can look past that. People who can lead with empathy, people who can understand, looking past stereotypes, looking past badges and tabs, and try to, use that leadership that they have, extend that influence, and try to get the best out of that person. Because everybody has something valuable to add, and it's up to you as the leader to try to find what that is. Exactly what you're talking about, putting the buses or the people in the right. You got to find out what their skills, knowledge, knowledge, skills, attributes are as that leader. Discover that from everybody, and then put them in the right roles and so on. So that's really what you want once you start getting to that operational level of leadership, is being able to look past all that stuff that stuff that doesn't really mean anything, and really be able to assess people all the way down to their core, and then being able to find the best value, get the best value out of them, and put them in the right places and so on.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, putting them in the right places too.
Mm-hmm.
Not trying to fit a square peg through a round
Yeah.
hole. And if,
Mm-hmm.
if that person's not cut out for, a certain position, then okay, not a big deal.
Yeah.
You're not cut out for it. It is what it
Yep.
is. And
Yep.
and we'll get the right person in that role. And
Mm-hmm.
as a group, we all get better when we have the right people in the right role. Because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, you end up having somebody who they don't very effectively. Then there's that issue like I was dealing with that I was talking about earlier when someone was like, well, who the hell's in charge? And it's like, oh,
Right,
me.
yeah.
It's like you end up with situations like that. And I wasn't the right person for that. I mean, I may
Right.
have been with the right training and whatever, but I was just kind of thrown into it. And so no,
Yeah.
I was not the right person at that point. And I was super relieved when I
Yeah.
was no longer in
Yeah.
that position. But
And then, and also at that level, you talk about finding, the right talent and molding people and so on.
Yeah.
But, sometimes that individual is just not cut out for the military or the organization that you're in.
yeah,
And so, as that leader, you have to also be able to, sometimes the best thing for that person and for the organization is to separate that person from the organization.
right.
So you've got to be able to do that as well as a leader, and not try to be everybody's best friend. You're the leader. So at the same time, someone who just, you give them chances, if they absolutely are just not cut out it for whatever reason, then, you've got to separate them from the organization.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're right. There's sometimes that nurturing that person and helping them grow and whatever could help get them into, could mold them into the right type of person. But sometimes you can. I think we've all probably had some people in our military careers where, you know what? I don't know how that.
Yeah,
what was that
it's not
recruiter
working out.
thinking?
Yeah.
But the recruiter was thinking about
Numbers,
their
yeah.
numbers and making sure
Right,
that
right.
they met their quota for whatever time
Yeah.
period. That's their, I guess, their obsession.
Yeah,
is with that. But you also talking about quotas and numbers and metrics
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. You do talk about those metrics in your book.
Mm-hmm.
As far as Vietnam, global war on terrorism.
Yep.
How can we look at that and look at it's always good to have.
Yeah.
You want to know, certain data points, but but it's more than just that, right? It's more than just data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And so, being a GWOT veteran, we've obviously, all of us have been exposed to that obsession with that green metric, right? And so we fought the wars by PowerPoint and Excel spreadsheets, trying to chase after these numbers that get us to whatever bubble chart that's green. And so, like you said, and all this obsession starts with Vietnam. With the body count is kind of the biggest one that everybody remembers, but there was a whole host of other metrics that they were measuring. And like our conflicts, it took over, and it became the driving force for the war, and that's how you were measuring success. That really started with Vietnam and never ended, still kind of going on today, but kind of to a lesser extent, thankfully. But yeah, so conflict messy, right? It's super messy. Anything with human beings is messy. Conflict probably being the tip of the spear of that messiness. So trying to measure that in some type of scientific way, it has value, like you said. There's some value to it, but it should not be the thing that takes over and becomes the forefront and becomes the driving force for everything that we're doing. So, yeah, okay, we've got a green metric, but what's actually behind that? Like, let's talk about what's behind that made that green metric. How did we get there? What human things did we do? How did we influence whatever to get to that metric versus this? All right, it's green. Why is it 72 and it should be, 82? Let's get 4 numbers on there, and then so that also has really harmed the profession, the military as a profession as well, because now you're putting pressure on people to fudge numbers. And everybody in the military has seen that happen. And once that fudging starts happening, it really starts eroding away at at our profession. So I think there's value added, but there's definitely a danger to it. We shouldn't become obsessed with it. It's a tool, but it's not the end all be all to any time we go into conflict. That becomes our way to measure success, if you will.
Yeah, and it really makes those data points irrelevant if we're going to start just fudging numbers and just putting whatever just to get a green and pass whatever that metric is. That metric is useless.
And then once we get green, we're like, next.
Yeah,
and there's still stuff in there in that metric that we need to focus on, but because we got it to green, we're good. Let's get to the next one and get that next red or amber to green.
right, exactly. And so one of the things that I I look at when I'm looking at numbers like that is
Hmm.
what happens after it gets to green. Do
Yeah.
you get, if it's some performance metric or whatever, and you see a chart of all the data points that are leading up to that green, and it
Yeah.
gets, it's, it's a rocky road, it's going up, and eventually you get that green. Okay, cool.
Hmm.
Now the focus of whoever was in charge of that green metric, whatever that
Hmm.
was, their focus is now on something else.
Something
And
else.
so
Yep.
now you look at that green metric and it's starting to slip back down.
Yep.
And
Exactly. Yeah.
so the problem, whatever the problem was that they were trying to solve to get
Hmm.
to that green metric, never really got solved. It got
Yeah.
fixed temporarily. It's
Yep.
like putting duct tape over a hole on a
Yeah.
boat or something, and as soon as that duct tape starts to lose its stickiness, you're going to get that
Yeah.
water back in the boat,
Yeah.
and so yeah, temporarily you solve the problem, but you didn't, or so, temporarily you fix the problem, but you didn't
Hmm.
actually solve the problem. And so,
Hmm.
when you're looking at those metrics, I think the more important thing, to your point, is what's going on behind that number, and
Hmm.
what's going on to make sure that that number either stays level at
Right.
where it's at, or continues to climb if that's the
Yeah.
direction that you want it to go, or decrease depending on what it is. If
Yeah.
it's a good or a bad metric depending on
Right.
whatever. You want to see, like, how do we sustain that, whatever
Hmm.
that is, right? And that's a challenge when you're just focused on that one pinpoint in time
Hmm.
and said, yep, okay, at the end of this quarter we had you know 50% fewer injuries, or
Hmm.
whatever the metric is. Okay, now let's go focus on some other metric, and now injuries start creeping back up,
Yep. Yep.
because you're not paying attention to safety and things like that
Yeah.
as
Yeah. It's
often,
it's
right?
it's it's riding that metric wave, right?
Right.
And so I'm hoping that the AI, we're really kind of leaning into AI. So I'm hoping that it doesn't go the way that metrics driving force for everything that we're doing.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that AI will be able to look across all those metrics, right, and be able to get after exactly what you're just saying, and hopefully find trends and find the discovery behind them. That would kind of be the goal of AI. I would hope that we were
Yeah.
able to do with it.
Well, and that's actually an interesting point, because
Hmm.
I've found that AI is able to take a large data set
Yeah.
and kind of just sift through all of the data
Right.
and make sense of it in a way that you and I could do. We're
Yeah.
intelligent people. We can do it. It might take me a week or two to
Right.
read through all of it and start, compiling charts and
Hmm.
making the graphs and stuff like that, where you feed it to AI and, uh, let it do its thing. And
Yeah.
sometimes within, a minute or so, you have all of that same
Yeah.
dataized and everything like that. And so that, in my mind, is the ideal situation, because then you can
Hmm.
now start digging into those numbers instead of just
Hmm.
playing around with those numbers and trying to
Yeah, no, exactly.
mess
And
around with it,
hopefully
right?
AI will take that more holistic approach. One of the interesting metrics in Vietnam, I wrote about in the book as well, is that so they were tracking how many weapons they were capturing on the battlefield from the enemy. And so this was a number, right? I captured 10 AK-47s today, and I captured 15 AK-47s today, the next day, and then they traced that over time, and the number was just going up hugely, over the years. And so the way they assess that is that, the NVA and the Viet Cong, we are hammering them so hard that they don't even have time to recover their weapons off their dead soldiers and so on. And what it turned out being is that they were being so well supplied from China that they lost an AK-47 or an older machine gun or whatever. They didn't care. They just left it there because they had 10 more back hidden somewhere. So,
Sure.
maybe AI could have taken that more holistic approach and look at, Chinese arms sales and all those things that maybe we would not have even assessed at our level and been
Right.
able to get that broader picture. I don't know. Hopefully that's what we can do with it.
Well, and there's another interesting thing that I think it came out of World War II. I forget exactly which war it came out of, but they were looking at the planes that were coming, and they were
Mm.
looking at where the bullet holes were hitting
Right.
under
Yeah.
the
I read that.
underneath
Yeah.
the plane, right? And they were looking at those, and they're like, okay, well, we need to. The first thought was, we need to strengthen the armor where these bullet
Hmm.
holes are hitting. And then someone was like, well, no, in the armor where the bullet holes aren't, because the planes that aren't making it back are the
Yeah.
ones that are
Right.
getting the bullet holes in those places.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
strengthen it in the opposite locations. It was a little counterintuitive, but
Yeah.
it was just that like the light bulb went off in that one guy's head, and it made him say, well, no, those are the planes that made it back. The
Yeah,
planes are
yeah.
obviously capable of flying with bullet holes in these locations. So let's not worry about those locations
Right.
right now.
Yeah. That's a
Let's
good
worry
point.
about those
Yeah.
other locations, the
That's
fuel
funny.
tank or
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
And so, it's that we can get into statistics and these kind of things, right? But, and we can, I probably nerd out about that kind of stuff quite a bit, but when you lose that human touch,
Yeah.
then you're just looking at numbers, and you might as well just be a computer that's
Yeah.
looking at, right? If you the computer and just say whatever it tells me, yes or no, or good or bad, or whatever it is, green or red, or some other metric, then you're missing of that. So yeah, fine. Use the computer, use the AI tools, use that are out there, but use them in a way that enables you to make faster decisions based on that data, but still incorporate some of that human.
Yeah,
Humanity,
absolutely.
right?
That's kind of the danger of it. If you put somebody like me and try to train me to read and assess something that comes out of AI, probably not going to be successful. So, we see this younger generation coming up. They're going to be growing up with AI.
Yeah.
So when they come into the Army, it's going to be very comfortable for them. They're going to know, how to assess that data and so on and put that human touch onto it. At least I hope.
Right.
But yeah, it's a very good point.
Yeah, and I'm looking at like my kids. They're not yet of military age, but the things that they are doing with computers, and I think to myself at their age and the things I was doing with computers, and
Yeah.
it's like night and day. I might as well have been a caveman at that point,
Right, right,
with
yeah.
the things that I was doing, and they're doing all sorts of crazy things, and it's great, but I that they people in this generation, they lose some of the skills that maybe we were growing up. I'm sure your teachers, your math teachers in school were telling you that you're not going to have a calculator to carry around with you in your pocket all the time. And it turns out that was wrong.
Yeah, that's wrong. It's not true at all. Yeah.
But like we had to learn how to do mental math, and kids
yeah.
nowadays, like, why? Like everybody has a calculator. Why would I need to
No,
learn how to do
as
that,
a historian, younger kids now, they can't even read cursive, so they can't even read, letters from the Civil War or whatever. Interesting.
That is interesting. That's one thing that we make sure that we taught our kids is how to write
nice.
cursive, so that they don't lose it.
Right.
You're right. Like a lot of their peers don't know how to write
teach
cursive.
it anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a dying art form, and it's that's the way the whole world communicated.
Yeah.
In written language, anyways. For the longest time. And so,
longest
time. Looking back at even like old historical documents, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, those are all in cursive.
Cursive, yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah, it's true.
So your book also touches on some of the, just kind of shifting gears a little bit here, it touches on some of the struggles of reintegration. I'm sure you experienced some of that with your father, maybe even yourself a little bit as well. But what advice do you have for veterans who may be disconnected from civilian life?
Yeah, there's kind of one of the things I always try to tell people who are transitioning and so on is, everybody always tells you that, hey, a lot of your skills are not transferable, from the military to the civilian world. So, if you were an infantry officer, an armor officer, or whatever, there's not really a lot of jobs, driving tanks and things like that. So, so they always tell you that, you have to change the way that you act, and you have to change the way that you present yourself in some ways, and some of those skills, and understand that those are not desirable skills for the civilian market and so on. So I would say, yeah, that's a valid point, but I would focus on the skills that are transferable. And they're really just basic skills that many in society do not have, in the civilian society do not have. And they're just like simple little things like proper grooming, right? Showing up to a job interview with your haircut, shaving. That's things that are driven to you that, a lot of people in society don't even think about that. And they show up with dirty shirts and things like that. Being time, standing up when your boss comes and talks to you when you're sitting at your desk, Just little things like that, being
Yeah.
respectful towards people, looking people in the eye, shaking their hand, all those little things that you learn in the military, which you don't realize are really strengths for you. A lot of society does not have and does not really practice anymore. So I always say, yes, understand that there's some things that are non-transferable, but you also have a host of like basic skills that you think are not highly valuable, but they are. And so focus on those as you're doing that reintegration, because that's going to take you a very long way. And then the second thing is, that disconnection that you might feel. Um, I always try to find something that you can pour some of your passion into. Most of us who join the military, passionate people, even though we try to hide it and say that we're tough and so on. But we join it because we want to be part of something bigger. We find, wearing that flag on our shoulder and defending the Constitution and all those types of things, we find that honorable, and we find that that's a passion in us. So you've got to find something that you can now pour that passion into. So for me, it's writing. But for others, it might be simple things like, I don't know, cooking, working on engines. I mean, whatever, a podcast for you, something like you can pour your passion into. That'll help you, in my opinion, make that reintegration and find a substitute for that passion that you miss in the military.
Yeah, and I like how you used examples of things that are not necessarily your job, right?
Right.
You can have a job doing whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but you can still have that other passion,
Mm-hmm.
passion project, a hobby, a thing like that. That's on the side. That's a thing that
Yep.
you come home to at night, and you get to look forward to
Mm-hmm.
that thing that you get to do. Maybe it's working on an engine, or making
Yeah.
a nice meal for your family, or
Mm-hmm.
working in your garden, or
Yeah, absolutely.
whatever that could be. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many different things out there that people could be
Mm-hmm.
passionate. But I found that not having something that
Mm-hmm.
you have, like, what do you have to look forward to?
Yeah.
Like, if you
Yeah.
hate that job and you're like, oh man, obviously if you hate your job, like that's not an ideal situation. That's
Yeah.
maybe an extreme example. But if you're just lukewarm about the job, and
Mhm.
it's the thing that's paying the bills, well, think about it like it's the thing that enables you to be able to do those things that you do
Yeah.
enjoy, and look at it that way, and
Yeah.
be able to um, going back to some of the first points that you were making, showing up on time,
Yeah.
having a good haircut, and
Yeah.
looking presentable, and
Right.
just all that stuff is set you ahead of probably
Big time.
80,
Yeah.
90% of the
Yep.
population. And then that extra 10, 20% is going to be your work ethic, the abilities that you bring to the table, and let's face it, everybody who has ever served in the military, I don't care for 2 or 3 years or up to 20 plus years, we've all learned how to do something. We all are trainable. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
even if you were an infantryman, and
Yeah.
sure, there's not a whole lot of jobs
Yeah.
that you're going to be applying infantry skills and tactics to in the
Yeah.
civilian world. You might be a mercenary or something, and
Yeah.
maybe you can find a job like that. But let's just face it, most people are not going to find those
Yeah.
types of jobs. But if you can do those that you were bringing up, and all those things, and
Yeah.
hey, you had to learn how to be an infantryman. You didn't go into the army,
Yeah.
the Marines,
Yep.
or whatever, being an infantryman with those
Yeah.
skills. You have to learn, and so you can
Yeah.
learn how to do another job too. And
Yeah, and
Yeah.
with that learning, you've got to be able to check your ego a little bit, because if you're coming out, again, perfect example, infantryman, got trained by a bunch of hardcore drill sergeants, just spent time in the 82nd of planes, and now I'm transitioning to whatever, and I've got maybe a 24, 25-year-old training me to do this job.
yeah,
In the back of your mind, oh, wait a minute, I've done all these cool things. Like, why am I listening to you? You've got to be able to kind of check your ego a little bit. I'd be like, all right, this person is 24, 25, but they obviously know this skill because they are training me in this for this position. So I've got to really, pick their brain and really actually learn what my new job's going to be. So yeah, I think definitely like all those things that you just talked about, but at the same time, we've also got to be able to kind of check ourselves when we make that transition. And when we're dealing with people who know nothing about the military and have no experience with it, etc.
yeah. That's a great point. It's got to be hard for some people who are coming out. Maybe they're 30, 35 years old, whatever.
Right.
And
Yeah.
they're being trained by a 25-year-old guy. And like, really, I got to listen to you? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you might still live at home with your
Right.
parents,
Yeah.
or, you know, right? It's like why am I listening to you? But they're the ones who've been doing it for the last few years, and you
Yeah.
haven't. And so, yeah, you got stuff to learn. And
Yeah.
yeah, be humble. And you know, I got into the military. I was a little bit older than most people are when they get in. And you know, I was like somewhere around there, not too incredibly older, but same age as some of my drill instructors
Okay.
and the drill sergeants. And you know, when I was going through, it's like, you know, we're almost peers, like we're high school together, you know.
Right.
And but I didn't change the fact that they were still screaming down screaming,
Yeah.
you know, telling me to do push-ups and do all these things. And if I had a chip on my shoulder, you know how many more push-ups I would have had to do.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Exactly.
I'm
Yeah.
checking that ego real quick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Definitely.
you know, think of that 25-year-old kid who's training you as
Yeah.
your drill sergeant or drill instructor or
Exactly.
whatever. And you know, you start getting a chip on your shoulder, go smoke yourself and
Exactly. Yeah. That's the way to
get
do
it
it.
out of the
yep.
way.
That's a good point. That's funny.
But yeah, I mean, it's just mindset, right? It's you got to have the right mindset going into these things. And
Yep.
you know, I know we have a lot of issues with mental health going into, you know, people coming out of the military. We had it in Vietnam. We just didn't talk about it much in prior conflict. We're talking about it now a little bit more. And you know, we are seeing the suicide rates that are going up, you know, amongst post 9/11 veterans, but even Vietnam era. I was actually surprised a few years ago. I was looking at some numbers, and a good chunk of me to a day number was coming from people who were in their 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And that's not our generation. That's the older you know, Vietnam era generation. And that was kind of surprising to me. I was expecting it all to be, you know, like post 9/11 veterans.
Right.
And, but not to say that post 9/11 veterans aren't having that problem too. So you know, we got to those people to seek help. And
Absolutely.
you know, whether it's Vietnam era, whether post 9/11 or any of those eras, you know, if you're struggling, go get some help, talk to somebody, and there's people.
No,
out
absolutely.
there, right?
Yeah, I agree. And you know, doing the research for the book and so on, you know, it kind of made me realize, and this is probably true for a lot of GWOT veterans, is that, you know, I know more people who committed suicide than I do who died in combat in GWOT. You know, so, and I think it's probably the truth for most of us.
Right.
And so, you know, Vietnam, you know, when I asked my dad's generation about it, kind of like you just alluded to, they were like, "Oh, that was not our problem. That's your generation's problem." But it's not true. I mean, it's been every conflict's problems has had that exact same thing. Like you said, they just didn't talk about it.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, the beauty of today is that there's so many different avenues and mediums that are talking about it. For example, your podcasts. There's the, you know, mainstream media. There's all types of, you know, VS veteran service organizations that are trying to offer help and things like that. So I think it's great that it's really being brought into the open, which I think is a very positive thing for our generation. And so, you know, I applaud you for what you're doing with this podcast and, you know, really bringing that and making it not uncomfortable to talk about it anymore.
Yeah, and you know, I try. I guess you could say lead by example, because I'll come out on this show and I'll talk about my struggles, the things that I've done, and to get help and go get mental health you know, support and utilize those resources. And sometimes for those people who are out there struggling and suffering alone, and they're like, it's, you know, I'll be fine, you know, I'm tough and I can deal with it and all that. Sometimes all they need to do is just hear that, hey, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay
Yeah.
to go talk about it and
Yeah.
get the help that you need. And that's what I try to do. It's like, I'm not perfect. Like, I'm sitting here, I'm hosting this podcast, and I'm trying to share resources and stories from other people, but I'm not perfect either. And I need help. I still go to therapy, and it's
good,
like,
good.
you know, I look at myself as a continuous work in progress, and I'll, you know, maybe I'll get there eventually, but today's not that day. And so I still got work to do, and I'm going to keep doing the work until I don't need to do it anymore. And you know, if you're out there and you're struggling, you're suffering, and you're just kicking the can down, doing anything to better yourself or or change whatever situation that you find yourself in. Like, I don't know, man, look in the mirror. It's kind of your problem.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
gotta figure it out and do something to make that change.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to that passion piece which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
That passion, something else is going to, whether it's alcohol, drugs, depression,
Mhm.
something is going to take that space over. So it's really important to find that passion. And and I'll say, for kind of a plug for senior leadership, both in the military and for in the civilian world. A lot of senior leaders now will, they kind of poo-poo social media,
Yeah.
not understanding that the younger generation, that's where they are now living out their lives, for good, bad, or or whatever. But so if you're not in that space, you're missing out a whole lot as a leader. So you can, I can't tell you how many suicides I prevented because I was friends on social media with one of my subordinates, and I saw something that they put in there that really set off some alarm bells, and we were able to intervene and get them help when they needed it.
That's great.
So I would say, not to be, for a senior leader, older person, I would say don't be afraid of social media, embrace it, use it for what it is, and that way you can kind of monitor your subordinates and really be able to offer them help when they need it, if they're afraid to come out and ask for it themselves for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's a great point, because you may not be out there posting selfies like a
Yeah, you don't have to post anything, just what they're posting.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly. Get it set up and get in touch with people and use it for the connection tool that I think
Exactly,
it was
yeah.
originally intended for,
yeah.
and not sharing like stupid cat photos and
Yeah.
stuff like that,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, use it for that purpose, and that way, God forbid someone is reaching out for help. All their other friends, their feeds are filled with junk, like we were just
Yeah.
talking about.
Mhm.
They might just miss it because
Yep.
it didn't pop up in their feed. But if it pops up in yours, maybe you're something.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, be there for them. If you're in a leadership position, I would suggest that you make sure that your subordinates know that they can reach out to you if they
Yeah.
need that type of help, and that it's not going to be like a now your career's in jeopardy because you
Right,
decided
yeah.
to get help. Like don't be that guy.
Don't be that guy, definitely.
Well, man, this has been a great conversation. I didn't want to get too in the weeds on your book, because I do want people to go out and get a copy of the book and actually read the book instead of having it all dictated to them right now.
Yeah.
But this has been to me, it's been an enlightening conversation, and I think based on some of the talked about with your book, the book is going to be very enlightening as well for a lot of listeners who pick up a copy. Where will people be able to go and get a copy after they hear this interview?
Yeah, so it's you're May 27th. So yeah, they can get it through Casemate Books. They can just Google "Born Fact of Conflict." But they can also, it's also available Barnes and Noble, Amazon. Probably the easiest way is just to go to my website, and that's just Pat Naughton. So PAT, N as in number, AUGHTON.com. And then from there, it'll link you to go where you can go purchase the book. But with the book, I really tried to appeal to a broader audience. So for anybody who's listening to this, it's not just another war book. It has everything you can think of. If you're looking for that academic piece of the argument between both conflicts, it's there. If you want that human story, the human interest story of generational impact of conflict on society, it's there. If you want some war stories, it's there. Like, it's all there in that book, So I'm trying to. Right now, there's a real gap between those who serve and then the rest of society.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to try to create a book that would help with that understanding, trying to close that gap a little bit. And so I hope that's what I achieved with the book. And yeah, again, patnaughton.com. That's probably the best place to go if you're interested in purchasing a copy.
Excellent. Well, I'll have links to all of that in the show notes for the listeners, and I'll make sure that they get access to all of that. But really, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Highlights and some of the stories that kind of came from your research and what went into this book. I think the book's going to be a great, and looking forward to hearing more about it. down the line.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Conversation that you're doing for veterans.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.